forgot to hit record. We want to record this. Between 2007 and 2018, he was the chief executive of the Professional Standards Authority in the UK from 2002 to 2007. He was the National Director for Patients and the Public at the Department of Health, and before that, Chief Executive of the Alzheimer's Association. He has chaired several inquiries. For the UK government and the National Health Services Information Governance Board. In 2015, he was awarded the CBE by Her Majesty the Queen for the service to health and regulation reform. He's a fellow of the Faculty of Public Health of the Royal College of Physicians and received an Outstanding Leadership Award from the World Health Executive Forum in 2018. Harry has led many reviews and inquiries and advised regulators and governments in the UK, Canada, Australia, Ireland, New Zealand, and Hong Kong. The Harry Cayton Report on Health Professions Act in British Columbia was published by the Minister of Health in April 2019, giving rise to the new BC Health Professions and Occupations Act in 2022. His governance review of the Law Society of British Columbia in 2021 has been influential across Canada. He is currently working with a number of regulatory organizations in Canada and elsewhere with the World Health Organization. He is a member of the Oversight Board of the Journal of Medical Regulations and of the International Advisory Group of AHPRA. He is an independent advisor to Thentia Group Systems and a senior advisor to the Regulatory Practices, a consortium of experts established to support the unique governance challenges regulators face. Welcome, Harry. Unfortunately, we didn't have a chance to organize before the meeting. Did you want me to give you presenter, or do you want me to show your presentation?
It's probably just as straightforward, Adam, if you would share your screen and put my presentation up on that, and I'll just ask you to move on. Great. So at least that bit's working. So good morning, everyone. Those of you for whom it's morning, it's late afternoon here in London, UK. And if, as Adam says, a few other people are from different parts of Canada and so on, I'm sure it'll all be different times for all of you. So I'm very pleased to join you, and I'm grateful for the invitation. So I'm just been asked to give a kind of general presentation about profession-led regulation. I use that phrase because it's rather taken over from self-regulation, because after all, we now live in a world where most profession-led regulators have a number of public members on their boards, and in some cases as many as 50%. So I don't think we can any longer say it's purely self-regulation. It is still, I think, primarily in Canada, led by the professions, but it's not for professions. And one of the themes of what I'm going to say is that professional regulation now is really for the people, for the community, for the publics, and I'll talk about that. I also stress that it's not a right. You don't have a right to self-regulation, to profession-led regulation. It is a privilege granted, in your case, by Manitoba. As I will also say later on, it can be taken away if you don't exercise that privilege properly. So next slide, please, Adam. So I start with this slide because I thought it's really important to put what you do in context. You are significant contributors to people's health. You have an important role in health systems, and therefore you need to be operating within an understanding of the way in which health systems are changing. And these are the most important, I think, influences on health systems globally. First of all, our populations are aging. People are living longer, and because people are living longer, we have more older people who have chronic and long-term conditions. There used to be, when I was working with people with dementia and Alzheimer's, there used to be a happy theory that as we got older, maybe the burden of disease would diminish. But that, I'm afraid, has not shown to be true. And so more and more people, particularly in older life, have more than one condition. And that's the third point here. There are comorbidities. It's no longer good enough just to talk about someone having cancer. Someone can have cancer and dementia. Someone can have cancer and diabetes. These conditions are not separate. They're often combined. And in dealing with this significant change in the pattern of healthcare, we have a worldwide shortage of health workers, and you know that very well. In Canada, many provincial governments are passing new legislation or urging regulators to be better at engaging with international graduates and bringing them into the workforce. We also have a significant and very, very rapid growth in health technologies and artificial intelligence. And I'm sure we'll come to that point later, but your work, I think, is going to be particularly affected by the development of artificial intelligence. I hope it will never remove the importance of human beings, but I would have thought your occupation in some ways is one of the occupations that is most challenged by the ability of artificial intelligence to do at least a significant part of your work. We also have on the demand side a real change in the expectations from the public. They want rapid responses. They want better and more personal care. They want to be able to engage actively themselves in decisions about their own health. And finally, we have, of course, the challenge of epidemics. We've seen the massive impact globally of the COVID pandemic, and we are seeing much greater global interconnectivity. I was flying on an airplane recently to Australia, and I sat next to someone who worked, she was English, but she worked in the health system in Australia. She was telling me that they sent all their scans overnight to be read in the United States so that they could provide a 24-hour service. So she said they used to, if you had a scan on a Friday, you had to wait till the following week to get any result, and now it can all be done through technology 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So there are huge benefits that are coming out from some of these changes, but there are also risks to the way people currently work. Next slide. So what does it mean to be a regulated profession? I've already pointed out that it's a privilege. It's a privilege because it is granted to you by the government. It doesn't matter where you are, whether you're in Ontario or in HSBC or in the United Kingdom or in one of the states in America, if you are a regulated profession, your regulated ability comes from the government. And it comes from the government because it's thought to be in the interests of the public, that you as a profession, you as the experts in what you do, take responsibility for the quality of the delivery of your work. But to be responsible for the quality of the delivery of your work is quite an onerous task, and that is why it can be taken away. And to be regulated is to be recognized for your service to the public. And I'll talk a bit more in a moment about what I mean by the public, but it does mean that your first and really most important task is not about your profession, but is about the public who your profession serves. And to be a regulated profession is to have the power to set your own standards, to believe and to develop your expertise, to share your expertise with others working in your occupation, to set standards, and if necessary, and one hopes this is very rare, to remove people from your profession if they don't meet the standards that you expect. And it's also a personal challenge. It's a personal commitment to competence in your chosen occupation, but also to good conduct. And this is one of the interesting things, I think, for professional regulation, is that it extends beyond your work into your private life. There's obviously some kind of boundaries there that we have to navigate, but we have seen during the pandemic, for instance, real challenges from professionals who perhaps have been vaccine skeptics or who have opposed public health policy in relation to pandemic restrictions. And the regulators of those different occupations have had big challenges about the extent to which you can control and restrict what people say in their private life, or what people make public as a private statement. And we can discuss that later when we have some time for questions, I hope, but I think it's an important and difficult area of regulation. Okay, next, Adam. So I thought it would be helpful to make a distinction for you between the role of a professional regulator and the role of a professional association. And of course, Canada has had, and still has in some provinces, a merger of these two functions. And that, I think, has been quite a difficult path to tread, because they are in many ways in conflict. So if you're a professional association, it is quite right and proper for you to promote the interests of the profession. And to say, we are here to represent our profession, to argue for its value and importance, and perhaps to argue for better recognition and more pay. But that is very different from the task of a regulatory college, which is to act in the interests of the public. Similarly, a regulatory college is focused on patient safety and on the prevention of harms. And an association, quite rightly, is focused on building and supporting the reputation and the status of the profession. professional associations often provide financial benefits to their members. It might be through insurance policies, if that's needed. It might be through opportunities to get learning and training, whereas the regulator is concerned with running its operations with efficiency and effectiveness. A regulator sets standards and aims for quality of provision and of care, whereas associations, again, quite rightly, will provide social activities for members, annual dinners, events, shared communal activities, and often give annual awards and recognition for people who have contributed greatly to the profession. Whereas, of course, a regulator is at the opposite end, taking in complaints, disciplining its registrants, and really acting to some extent, not I hope very much, but to some extent as the policeman of the profession. And I think the terminology is also quite important. Associations have members, people choose to be a member of an association, but a regulator has registrants or licensees, depending on the terminology. People don't choose, they have to be registered, they have to be a licensee in order to practice their work. So you can see that expecting one organization to fulfill both of these sets of functions is quite difficult, because some of them are in very direct competition with each other. And we've seen in Alberta recently the government announcing that it's going to make sure that the associations are separated from the regulatory functions, and in some cases, such as the nurses in Alberta, they've chosen to make that separation themselves in advance of the requirement from the government. And in other provinces, that separation has been in place for quite a long time. In many countries, UK, Australia, New Zealand, that separation has long been in place. We can come back to this again if you have thoughts or questions about it later. Okay, next slide, Adam. So what are you there for? Well, I've said this already, but the prime purpose of regulating any health professional is to protect patients and the public from harm. Now, that may sound slightly odd because, of course, your real purpose is to do good and to ensure that the public is safe and receives good quality healthcare. But of course, people can make mistakes, and mistakes can create harm, and people can have a bad experience with a health professional in your particular occupation, because most of you, I suspect, not all of you, may not have very direct personal contact with the public, but in many health professions there is very direct interaction between the health professional and a patient. Often the patient is very vulnerable and abuse can happen of various kinds. So regulating health professionals deals with personal behaviors as well as professional skills. But in your occupations too, if you make significant errors, then people can definitely be harmed as a consequence. So how do professional regulators deliver this task? They do this by being fair, transparent, thoughtful, efficient, and effective within the legal framework that they've been given. And so, as a board or as a council of a regulator, you need to be very focused with your chief executive and your staff team on these values. Do you do your work with care, efficiently and effectively? Are you transparent? And are your decisions fair and understandable to others? You've been given the power to regulate your members, your registrants, on behalf of the citizens of Manitoba. So they must always be in your mind's eye as the people for whom you work. You don't work for your registrants or members, you work for the people of Manitoba. And if you fail to keep people safe, if you fail to put the public interest first, or to do your job well, it is always possible, although rare, for the government to step in and take away the privileges that you have been given. And we've seen this, we saw that in Ontario a few years ago, where there was a major upheaval over the teachers regulator. The teachers regulator was closed down in BC. The new Health Professions and Occupations Act will result in the closure of a number of separate regulators and a very dramatic change in their boards, who will no longer have any elected members on them. So it's not just a theoretical possibility, it's a reality that privilege of professional regulation can be removed from regulators who don't do their jobs properly, just as you have the power to remove the ability to work from someone who you regulate who doesn't do their job properly. Okay, next slide. So in order to achieve those objectives, what do you actually have to do? And I think this is an important set of things that the council, the board of a regulator has to do. First of all, you have to understand what are the risks of harm presented by your particular profession. They vary considerably from profession to profession. And you need to think about, I always say to regulators, can you tell me the 5 most significant risks of harm that your occupation might create if it doesn't do its job properly? And you need to think that through. It might well be missing cancer when cancer is visible. It might be missing some other evidence of serious underlying illness. It might be misreading the information that you're interpreting. It might be writing incorrect notes and records. But understanding the particular risks of harm presented by your own profession is a really important part of your task. And if you don't know what those are, then you can't set appropriate standards and you can't deal with possible complaints in a proper manner. In order to do this, your first task is to register those people who are qualified and competent to do the work. I always say it's quite simple to imagine what you should do, but it's not always easy. You should register everyone who is qualified and competent and no one who isn't qualified and competent. And where that, of course, becomes a challenge is particularly with international graduates or people entering the profession who may have been qualified in a different jurisdiction, and making sure that the processes you have are both robust and fair. Thirdly, you set the standards for professional practice. You are the experts. You need to be constantly up to date, ensure that new technologies are absorbed into professional practice, and make sure that you set standards that are realistic and practicable in the real world. You also set standards for personal conduct. I've mentioned that earlier. This means, of course, ethical, proper behavior towards colleagues, towards patients, and in your private life, insofar as that affects your professional conduct. I mean, it's an interesting and I think significant debate in professional regulation everywhere now is issues around social media. To what extent, if you are making inappropriate comments on Twitter, I think we're supposed to call it X now. If you're making inappropriate conduct in a public forum, whether that is or isn't of interest to your regulator. I mean, I can give just an extreme example, which comes from the UK, was of a pharmacist who was convicted of child abuse. And I mean, this was a female pharmacist, and the abuse was a physical, not a sexual abuse of her own child. The question there was, does that abuse of a child, that physical assault on a child, stop her being a good pharmacist? In the end, the courts decided it did, because to be capable of causing harm to a child actually meant she wasn't a suitable person to be a health professional whose duty was always to protect and to do good to people and children. But you can see that that is a debate that you could have. I could give you another example of a doctor in South Africa who murdered his wife. He spent 10 years in prison. He came out and he reapplied to be added back to the medical register. Now, many people would have said, well, that's completely unacceptable. You can't have a doctor whose oath says do no harm, who has murdered someone. But the medical regulator in South Africa let him back onto the register, saying there was no evidence he was a bad doctor and that he had served his time under the law and was therefore capable of rehabilitation. You can see these dilemmas are serious ethical debates and not always easy. And you have to enforce the standards that you've set through complaints and discipline. You should have, and I'm sure you do, ways of keeping practitioners up to date. That's often seen as or described as quality assurance or as continuing professional development. And you also need to communicate with the people that you serve. And I would say that you serve patients, you serve your registrants, and you serve the employers who employ your registrants. So you have more than one set of publics, I would say. And of course, if you look, as we must do, and as Adam reminded us actually at the beginning of this session, at diversity, ethnicity, First Nations, reconciliation, then you don't just have one group of publics, you have many groups of publics, different needs and expectations and different personal circumstances. So there's no such thing, I think, as the public. There are only many publics who often have conflicting and different preferences and needs. Next slide. So what are the skills you need? I think it's important to recognize that being a professional regulator is a profession in itself. It is a skilled occupation doing regulation. It's not an amateur occupation. It's something that requires a set of skills. And on a council or a board, you might not have every individual having all the skills, but you would hope that between you, you have a mix of these different skills so that you can run your organization effectively. The ability to do what I call horizon scanning, to look at what's coming down the line and what's ahead of you. And I would particularly raise the issue again of artificial intelligence and its likely impact on the area of healthcare that you work in. You need to have the ability to plan strategically for your own organization, to think about its future, to think about its needs next year or the year after or the year after that. Regulators often have 3-year or 5-year strategic plans, monitoring those plans, making sure that both your finances and your delivery are in place. Understanding your multiple publics, mentioned that before. Skills in evaluating and mitigating risks. And that includes your internal risks to your organization, reputational risks, financial risks, management risks, but also evaluating the risks of the occupation that you regulate. Making sure that professional practice is up to date, and that means your standards have to be up to date, they have to be refreshed and renewed. Enforcing both professional and personal standards. Managing the money of your organization. Many regulators, I find, have a difficult relationship with fees. After all, your job is not to keep the fees down in order to make the members happy. Your job is to raise sufficient money to run a good regulator in the public interest and to manage that money efficiently and effectively. I was talking to a regulator the other day in Ontario, where they have failed to put the fees up for 20 years. Because every year in their legislation, it requires them to go to a vote of the registrants. Well, no registrants have voted to have their fees put up for 20 years. This regulator is now on the verge of bankruptcy because it won't face the real problem of the cost of regulation and the need for its members to pay for the privilege of being self-regulated. So being able to manage money effectively and to plan for the future is really important. Developing your partners and partnership with them. And there'll be many partners. There'll be the other health professionals that you work with. There'll be the government. There'll be the health system. There'll be the public. There'll be other regulators. So looking outwards as well as inwards and being a good citizen, as it were, a good contributor to the health community in which you work. And of course, as I've said before, being able to communicate effectively about what you do and how you do it, and who are the people that you work with who need to understand the importance of your role. So these are quite significant skills. Not every individual who's on a board or a council will necessarily have all these skills, but you need to build a team of people who between them have all these skills and can really make sure that your regulatory body is run with the same professionalism as you would expect your occupation to be run. Okay, next slide. This is actually the last slide, you'll be pleased to know. And I have put the public first, last, partly because I started with it, but also because I want to remind you that this is the real reason that you exist. I've talked about there being multiple publics. I keep stressing this. The needs of different ethnic communities will be different. The needs of First Nations will be different. There will be different desires and needs from your employers. So you have a lot of people who are your customers, if I can put it that way, and you need to be aware of their needs. Keep your vision, aims, and values as an organization constantly in mind. Be consistent as a board in how you make decisions. I always recommend that people make a regulatory impact assessment for all policy decisions. And what do I mean by that? I mean that you have to not just think this is a good thing to do, but think, what is the impact of this decision going to be? So for instance, if you change a standard, you need to think about how people in the real world are going to put that standard into practice. You need to think about whether it has any impact on diversity or on different communities. Is it going to be harmful to some communities rather than beneficial? You need to make sure as part of that that you're not confusing professional interests with the public good. I've heard people say, oh, if we put the, if we argue for more fees or more pay, then more people will be attracted to the profession, and that's in the public interest. Well, that's not a regulatory decision. That's a professional association decision or a union decision. So making sure that you're not biased in your decision-making by putting professional interests first. And that's why having public members on your board, as you do, are very important voices to remind everyone that the public's interest comes first. You may have conflicting interests internally, and it's important that those are transparent, that they're declared, that people don't take part in particular decisions if they're decisions that might benefit them personally. And again, to repeat my perhaps two key messages, the public's interest first and prevention of harm is your main task. So at that point, if I may, I will stop and I'll see if we have any questions or discussion or comment, and I'll hand back to Adam.
Matt, you want to speak? I'm opening up the chat room for questions. You can ask questions through the chat, or you can use the hand gesture and we'll go through the questions. Matt?
I'll start off the questions, if you don't mind, by saying thank you. It's a real privilege to have you here with us today. I'd like your opinion. This is a bit of a personal question. The health human resource crisis, I feel, does impact our professionals' ability to serve the public. What have been your experiences from the point of view of regulatory organizations that have achieved some positive steps to solving the health human resource crisis without, as you say, advocating for greater pay through a union?
That's a really, really good question. There are a few regulators that I'm aware of who have written into their legislation that they have a duty to encourage supply. But the majority don't. The majority are really focused on the quality of provision. And you're quite right that the shortage of people doing this work, whether it's your particular kind of work or any other in the health system, is a major problem. I think the primary responsibility must lie with government. It's too much to ask an individual professional regulator to do it, but it's legitimate to argue with government, I think, that you need more people if you're to maintain quality. And it's important to also debate how best to bring new professionals into the system, either through enhanced, and this would be my preference, of course, through enhanced local training and making it easier for people within your community to see the merit of joining your occupation and to train to do it, but also by bringing in international workers. And that's something that Canada's always been actually very good at. We're very much compared with some other countries, including my own, which is rather against anyone coming in at the moment. It depends a little bit on the government you have at the time. So I would think one thing to do would be to argue for better training and provision of training. Another to argue for the importance of developing the availability of the profession. That doesn't mean you have to, as you say, argue directly for increased pay, but it's a matter for the government to think about. And thirdly, to review your own processes and procedures for international graduates to make sure that anyone who is good enough has an opportunity to come and to join your profession and to enhance its importance and value.
Thank you.
There's a question in the chat from Kathy Johnson. Can you see that, Harry?
I can read it.
Would you read it?
Yes. Thank you, and agree. It is a privilege to thank you and agree a privilege to listen to you. We often struggle in getting the message of our regulatory role to our registrants, in spite of educational attempts. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, keep going. Keep going is my best suggestion. I think you're not unique in that. And I think registrants often think that you're there to make their lives easier rather than to make their work better. I did stress, didn't I, that good communication is important. And obviously that's something you've tried and something you're doing. And I think you have to just keep pushing on that and keep talking about the importance of the work they do for the public. And I think that's a really key issue. Most people should be proud to be a professional who is entitled to the privilege of regulation. And I think there's a kind of maybe, I don't know whether you do this, but maybe getting into the training courses before people actually finish their qualification and having sessions with students about what it will mean when they become a regulated professional and why that's important for them and why they shouldn't expect that the regulator is there just to look after them. But regulators do look after people. They do help people to be better, but they're also there to challenge people who are not good enough. So I think probably good communication, consistent communication, and maybe if you can, engaging with the younger people and the students before they actually qualify to explain what being a regulated professional means.
Thank you. We have another question in the chat. This comes from Corey Campbell. Can you speak to what the regulator needs to be considering when creating professional standards in regards to AI?
Gosh, yes, that's another great question. I mean, I'm not an expert in your occupation and the skills that you have. I think AI is going to be very important and very difficult. There are two aspects of AI which, to me, regulators need to think about. One is, how on earth do we regulate artificial intelligence itself? That's something that governments are struggling with. And secondly, can we use AI in professional regulation? For instance, to speed up some of our own processes, such as registration or finance. But I think this is just speculation on my part, but I think in terms of medical technologies, your area of work, as I see it, is one of the most advanced. Sorry about that's my rather loud Big Ben clock. Apologies for that. Your area of work is one where technology has already made a huge impact. And I think that making sure you're, as it were, in control of that impact. So welcoming AI when it can contribute to safety, contribute to speed, contribute to accuracy, but making sure that it remains under the control of human beings who understand the decisions that the technology is making. After all, AI is there used ethically on our behalf. It's not there to take over from us. And it's quite interesting, isn't it? Apparently the public opinion suggests that if you ask people, or you say to people, look, this piece of technology is 98% accurate, and a human being making the same decision is 95% accurate, people still say, I'd like the human being. I'm more likely to trust the human being than I am to trust the technology. And I think that what that tells us is actually we need both. So we need human beings to interpret and to check the technology and to manage the technology and to control the technology. So I suppose in response to Corey, I would say that perhaps one of the strategic things you could be doing is setting up some kind of, small group of experts that to consider the role of AI in your occupation and in your work, and to get ahead of the decisions that other people might make. So you've got an ethical, strategic plan which doesn't reject it, but which takes it in to your way of working and shows you as a leader rather than as a follower. And that's the best I can do at the moment, because I don't have the expertise to say exactly how it should be used in your work.
I have a question.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I would like to ask a question related to the quality assurance programs that are required for regulatory bodies. Can you comment on what you feel are the key aspects that should be included in any quality assurance program that is put together by a regulator?
Well, To be honest, I'm sometimes a bit skeptical about those QA programs that are based on how many hours of something you've done during the year. You know, in my life, I've often come and spoken at conferences. You know, I've spoken at nursing conferences and dentistry conferences and God knows what conferences, engineering conferences. And in your conference pack, you often get a certificate of attendance. And I've got these points, you know, these certificates saying I've got points in nursing and points in dentistry and points in engineering. And I mean, it's completely meaningless. So I'm much more interested in QA programs that are looking at new issues, looking at, I mean, using your intelligence, I mean, as a, you know, knowledge as a regulator. What are the areas of our work that people get into trouble with? Are there particular things that we see in our complaints that come up more frequently than others? Shouldn't we be building those into our QA program? What I think is rather soul destroying for professionals who are doing their job reasonably well is sort of being told you have to go over and over and over it again. Whereas actually many people are doing a perfectly good job all of the time. So having a more flexible QA program that allows people to identify their own areas of need and say, I'd really like to do a bit more of this because I'm not as good at it as I should be. Looking at the pattern in your own profession of where people have difficulties and not just asking people to fulfill whatever it is, you know, 15 hours of attendance at this, that, or the other. You know, I don't think you should include listening to a speech by me as anything to do with your QA program. No points to be awarded. You know,
Too late.
I do think content is much more important than hours.
Thank you.
There any other questions?
Yeah, Matt has another one.
I have, I guess sort of I don't know if this will be the final question, but talking about the future, you mentioned that on your slide that as a regulatory organization, we should have our eyes as professionals, we should have our eyes set on the horizon. And sometimes I do struggle personally with, is the role of a regulator to obviously protect the public as a reaction to the current state and what is happening, or are we meant to be leaders and saying, this is the direction that we're going in, and therefore we are going to be out front creating policies on things that haven't necessarily come to fruition yet? And I struggle with that horizon view of a regulatory organization. I'd just like to hear you talk a little bit about this, what the regulator and quality of people currently practicing the current practice that we do professionally, and how that relates to looking at the horizon when creating policy to protect the public today.
Well, thank you. It's certainly true. I mean, you know, the old adage that if you've got your head in the air, you might trip over your feet is probably what you're thinking about. And you do need to keep focused on the present, but the present is a continuous process. Time doesn't stop. So the present is always moving forward. And I think what I do feel is that traditionally regulators have tended to be behind change. So they've waited for change to happen, and then they've thought, oh, we better regulate that because there's a new risk. And so I'm quite a strong believer that regulators should be as well as keeping the day job going, they should be looking up and saying what might happen. I mean, we talked a bit about AI. Let's take AI, for instance. If you just focus solely on the current technologies, there is no doubt that AI will come up and will actually have a very, very significant effect on how your profession operates. And if you haven't thought about that before it happens, you won't be in charge of it. And I do believe that one of the strengths of good professions is that they manage change effectively. And health professionals have done that amazingly well. Health professionals, if you think of the huge impact that pharmaceuticals have had on care, that surgery has had, that biology and the whole area of biotechnology has had, that scanning has had. These things have been enormous, and they've been absorbed by health professions very successfully over the last 20 years. But I personally think AI is going to be an even more dramatic change. And on the other side, we talked about social media. Social media has had a dramatic impact on the personal ethics of health professionals, and has been a big challenge to regulators, which they didn't necessarily see coming. Can't see everything coming, I'm afraid. So it's like all these things, it's balance. I'm not saying neglect the present, I'm just saying remember the present rolls forward, and you want to dodge that boulder before it hits you, or you want to make sure that you use it effectively as part of your work.
Thank you. Adam, would you like to say some words to wrap up our presentation? If there are no more questions, are there any more questions?
One last chance for questions. If you have questions following the meeting, I'm sure Harry's willing to answer questions. We had his email contacts up. You can visit his website. It's pretty easy to find. Just type in Harry Cayton, you'll find it. On behalf of CMLTM, our registrants, and the guests that joined us from across Canada, I thank you for a very interesting and informative presentation. Harry has allowed us to record this video, so once I edit it and put it in the right format, it will be posted on the CMLTM YouTube channel. Just give me a couple of weeks to do that. Thank you, Harry.
Well, thank you all very much. I've really enjoyed being with you, and I wish you're going to have a real busy day. I'm finishing my day now, and but I wish you a good and productive day, and thank you for your courtesy in listening to what I have to say.
Sorry for that technical difficulty at the beginning.
Well.